Let's now take you straight to Moscow, where the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed just a few hours ago. And in less than half an hour's time from now, he will be joining the Russian President Vladimir Putin for a private dinner. The Indian Prime Minister is on a two-day visit to Russia. Prime Minister Modi's last visit to Russia was in September 2019 when he was in Vladivostok for the Eastern Economic Forum meeting. This is also Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Russia since the start of the war in Ukraine. Let me now quickly take you through the Indian Prime Minister's itinerary. Tomorrow, the Indian Prime Minister will be interacting with the Indian diaspora. The Indian community, we are being told, is preparing a grand welcome for the leader. Indian restaurants, in fact, have added special Gujarati dishes to their menus. Reports saying at the community event, there will be Russian Kathak dancers. Tomorrow, the Prime Minister is also expected to lay the wreaths at the tomb of unknown soldiers. He will also be visiting a Russian nuclear energy facility. Most importantly, tomorrow is the 22nd India-Russia Annual Summit. What is on the agenda, you ask? Trade, energy, defense, just to name a few. It was for one of these summits that the Indian Prime Minister first visited Russia in November 2001. Back then, he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat and he was accompanying then Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee for the India-Russia Summit. We have some old photos for you. Speaking of this visit, Prime Minister Modi once said, and I'm quoting here, "Putin did not make me feel like I was less important, that I was from a small state or that I am new. He treated me amicably, as a friend. This opened the doors of friendship," quote unquote. And cut to the 8th of July 2024, Prime Minister Modi has picked Russia for his first bilateral visit after being sworn in as the Indian Prime Minister for the third time. In the last two terms, Prime Minister Modi travelled to the neighbourhoods for his first bilaterals, be it Bhutan in June 2014 or the Maldives and Sri Lanka in June 2019. This time, for his first bilateral visit after being sworn in, Prime Minister Modi has chosen Russia. And this tells you how much importance New Delhi gives to its ties with Moscow. This is a first priority relationship, one that goes a long way back. During the Cold War era, the Soviet Union was India's major defense supplier. Even now, reports say that around 60% of Indian defense equipment continues to be of Russian or of Soviet origin. One of India's aircraft carriers, INS Vikramaditya, was once Russian warship Admiral Gorshkov. Today, there are agreements in place between the two countries to supply S-400 missile systems to India, also the MiG-29 fighter jets, Kamov helicopters. India and Russia also have signed agreements for the licensed production of T-90 tanks, Su-30 MKI fighters, AK-203 assault rifles. And how can we possibly not mention the BrahMos missiles? It's been a game changer for India's defense sector and for the India-Russia defense relationship. And now with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Russia, the two countries will be looking at ways to take this defense relationship to the next level. In fact, we are being told that New Delhi and Moscow will be signing 7 to 8 defense agreements. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia comes a day before the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, leaders of the NATO member states will be meeting to mark 75 years of military alliance. How do you think the West is viewing the India-Russia summit? Let me read out what Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, has said, and I'm quoting here. West's close monitoring of the summit means they attach great importance to it. and they are not mistaken. There is something to attach great importance to, unquote. Remember, the West has tried and failed in getting India to criticize Russia's war in Ukraine. New Delhi has not explicitly condemned the Ukraine war, but time and again, New Delhi has called for peace. It has called for dialogue. India has said that it is on the side of peace and respect for international law and support for the UN Charter. In fact, in his departure statement, before embarking on his flight to Moscow, the Indian Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting here, "We seek to play a supportive role for a peaceful and stable region. A supportive role for a peaceful and stable region," quote unquote. India has also abstained from voting against Russia at the UN Security Council. Since the beginning of the war, the bilateral trade between the two countries reached record numbers. This has been fueled by India's purchase of Russian oil, something that has, ironically enough, not gone down well with the West, which secretly continues to import Russian energy. Anyway, let me show you some numbers. As per the Department of Commerce, bilateral trade between India and Russia reached a record $65.70 billion in FY 23 to 24. In fact, today, India is importing not only Russian oil, but also fertilizers, mineral resources, vegetable oil, precious stones, petroleum products, to name a few. Now, this gives you an idea of just how important, diverse, and multifaceted the India-Russia relationship really is. What it also tells you is that in this bilateral relationship, there are fault lines, and surely it is not called China. Sure, China and Russia have come closer since the start of the Ukraine war. In fact, Russia has become more dependent on China and the Chinese market. And China is not really a friend as far as India is concerned. It has engaged India in a standoff in Ladakh. There is no denying any of this. But here's a question we must ask. In the growing China-Russia relationship, is it aimed against India? We don't think so. Else, you would not have these visuals coming in from Moscow. Upon landing, the Indian Prime Minister was greeted by the first Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, Denis Manturov. In a rare gesture, Mr. Manturov also accompanied the Indian Prime Minister to his hotel from the airport. The Russian official is a senior to the Deputy Prime Minister who received the Chinese President Xi Jinping during his visit to Russia, in fact. You see, this visit is important for multiple reasons. Most importantly, this visit sets the tone for the foreign policy of the Modi government 3.0. Will the next 5 years see closer ties between India and Russia? What does that mean for you? Will there be increased tourism? Perhaps more direct flights between the two sides, something that the Indian diaspora in Russia have strongly been demanding. We are also being told the two countries are discussing visa on arrival. And now, to get us the latest from on the ground, with me live from Moscow is WION's Siddhant Sibal. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast, Siddhant. You have been on the ground interacting with various members of the Indian diaspora there as well. But I'll come to that in just a bit. Tell us more about the reactions you have been picking up, the mood on the ground, and what the expectations have looked like. We're looking at the dinner starting in just a short while from now.
Well, yes, that dinner is approximately 15 minutes from now. It is around 6:45 p.m. Moscow time. And if we talk about the mood on the ground, a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to the Indian diaspora. They welcomed the Prime Minister in full force. They were present outside the hotel, inside the hotel. And we know tomorrow the Indian Prime Minister begins his day by meeting the members of the diaspora. This, of course, is his first bilateral visit visit. And this, of course, is his first meeting with the Indian diaspora during his foreign visit. This has been a permanent fixture, of course. But talking about India-Russia relationship, a lot of optimism as to the trajectory of the relationship, a lot of outcomes expected, especially in the economic domain, especially when it comes to opening up of the new missions here in Russia. There will be an announcement on that. India already has its embassy here in Moscow and 2 consulates, one in St. Petersburg and one in Vladivostok. And the Prime Minister will be conferred with the highest award, civilian award of Russia. This was announced in 2019, but formally conferred on the Prime Minister. The process, the ceremony will take place on Tuesday.
Right. Will we see the 2 leaders also spending some time one-on-one aside from the official delegation?
Well, yes, we will see that. In fact, the Prime Minister's visit, the entire duration is 24-hour long visit in which Indian Prime Minister and the Russian President will be spending almost 8 to 9 hours together, including 2 hours today as well. That private dinner is due to start in approximately 15 minutes from now. And the big focus tomorrow remains on the 22nd annual India-Russia summit. It hasn't been happening for 3 years for several reasons. And in 2020, it could not materialize because of the COVID crisis. The last summit happened in 2021 when the Russian President had traveled to India in December of that year. And this time, of course, focus during the summit will be several areas of convergences, many of whom you have pointed out: energy, defense, space, connectivity. These are issues where both countries have convergences, but there are concerning issues as well. There is payments issue. There is the Indians in the Russian army, which has been an issue India has been raising. Just last week, it was raised by the Indian External Affairs Minister with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. And the third big issue for India remains the trade deficit. Yes, India has increased its import of crude oil, but there hasn't been import of Indian goods to Russia, and that remains a worrisome aspect of the trade deficit between India and Russia for New Delhi.
Right. And speaking of what the lineup is looking like over the next few hours, in just a short while, like you said, in about 15 minutes, we will see the private dinner between the 2 leaders commencing. What's the lineup there? What's on the menu?
Well, we're waiting for the menu, and many of us are keen right now to know what is on the menu. But going by tradition, going by the previous dinners where WION has been present as well, including the state dinner last year where the Indian Prime Minister had travelled to the US for the state visit as well. The focus has been vegetarian dinner for the Indian Prime Minister. So that is something we are keenly awaiting. But of course, this will provide a lot of opportunity for both the leaders to have that informal conversation, and that of course will set the tone for the big summit that happens here in Moscow, where of course I've already pointed out the issues that will be discussed, and of course how both countries can work together in an increasingly changing world. We know both countries have had a glorious past. 1971 war, the Soviet support is something that is still remembered, and last 2 decades, the annual India-Russia summit, India of course engaging on defense sector with the Russians is something that is much talked about. The focus of course for India and Russia both is that how they can work together at a time when world is changing, and of course Russia is looking more towards its east, towards Asia, when it faces isolation from the West.
We're leaving it there for the moment, Zadhan. Thanks very much for those updates. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.